In order for there to be authentic Christianity, so that it's not just a concept or a philosophy, but rather it is a way of life, a communal way of life with a particular witness and confession, we have to identify Jesus, and we have to acknowledge that identification once we've made it. What I mean by that is that when the Magi visited Bethlehem, they did so because they were given the gift of faith. Faith. It is faith that allows us to see beyond what the world presents, beyond what our human eyes can see. It is faith that allows us to probe the deepest realities of life and to see as God sees. This so often is difficult for contemporary man and woman because too often we worship our technology. We worship what we think we know so well. And at the same time, all the advances in technology, in learning, only make us realize that there's still a lot we do not know. But faith can allow us to see what technology and what the other universes of human discourse cannot. And so the story of the Magi visiting Bethlehem is constructed to show you and I that we must identify Jesus, not just in our heads, but in our hearts. The Magi, first of all, were probably Persian, aristocrats, intelligentsia. It really doesn't matter. But we know that they were not Jews. They were probably not familiar with Judaism. And they follow a star. And I ask you, how many of you would take the risk of following a star? I'm going to say to you, I don't think any of you would. I don't see in our world today enough courage to follow the stars that indicate things that are beyond our reach. I don't see much of that kind of courage. But the Magi followed the star. They didn't know where it would go or where it would stop. And they leave their comfortable lives, and they leave what they knew to venture out to a place that they did not know. In fact, the star leads them to Bethlehem. And Bethlehem was nowhere. Bethlehem was inconsequential. And yet these people who probably dealt with their own kind on a regular basis might have been dealing with more important things, at least more important concepts. They discussed things with the learned. And so they end up in Bethlehem. Now, most of you probably and I would have said, "What are we doing here? This is no place. Let's get out of here." But they don't. They follow the guidance of the star because they have faith that this star is a sign that there's something special here. And then the star stops over a peasant house. And you wonder, what was that house like? It certainly was not a palace. It certainly was not the dwelling of an aristocrat. I would venture to say it was probably a peasant house, maybe only one room. Well, these magi weren't used to one-room houses. In fact, they probably would not have ever even entered a one-room house. It would have been below them. But the star stopped there, and so they enter the house. And here again, they're confronted with something unfamiliar. They see a man and a woman and their child. Now again, they would have recognized immediately that this man and woman and their child were not aristocrats, were very common people. And they stayed. They stayed long enough to identify what they were seeing in that house. You've heard me preach on the gifts of the Magi many times. They brought gold because in faith they saw that this child was a king. He didn't look like a king. He wasn't dressed like a king. His parents didn't look like the parents of a king. But they could see he was a king. Can you see that he's a king? And they looked at the child, and they saw God in the flesh. Because in the heart and soul of every person of goodwill, of every person of integrity, of every person who wants to know the deepest realities of life, there is a thirst to see the face of God. And these magi saw the face of God, the second person of the Blessed Trinity in the flesh. And they recognized it. Do you see in the humanity of Jesus the divinity of Christ? Do you see in the divinity of Christ the humanity of Jesus? And when they looked at the child, they saw that this child was not to live an ordinary life, that he had dynamic purpose. He had a purpose that would alter humanity. They looked at him as the sacrifice that would redeem the world. They looked at him as the once and for all solution that would answer all the enduring questions of time. They saw in him that he would give himself totally so that humanity could be redeemed. Do you see that? And again, I say, unless we can see Jesus as King and God and Redeemer, there cannot be authentic Christianity. Because authentic Christianity compels you and me to be obedient to the King, to worship his divinity, and to accept the forgiveness and the grace of redemption. Without that, Christianity remains just a concept, just a philosophy, just a cultural color, if you will. But if we identify Jesus as the Magi did, if we identify him and we respond from the depths of our souls to the one whom we have identified, then we will find the joy that they found. It says they found joy at seeing the star. They found joy in following the star. And they found joy when the star stopped over the house, and they entered the house, and they saw their King and God and Redeemer.